I'm going to have to help people introduce me. You know, there's a long list of all the things I used to do. Go grab a seat. There's some good things I used to be. I was thinking when you said that, Ben. I used to be, as a young man, I used to live guilty, but then I discovered Jesus' grace. I'm a church kid, and I gave my life to the Lord when I was in Sunday school, apparently. When I was 6, goodness knows what I was sin conscious of at 6, but probably was yelling at the teacher or something and needed Jesus. But really, I would say I probably really got born again when I was about 16. I went to a youth camp. And for some strange reason, growing up in church, it was nobody's fault. It was the way I interpreted the messages. But I thought the goal that the church had for me was to be a nice guy. Like, I thought that's where everything was headed to. That the longer I stay around here, I'll become a nicer guy. The problem was I just wasn't very good at it. And so this idea, I'm thinking Christianity is about becoming a good guy. I don't feel like I'm a good guy. And, you know, I was very sin conscious. So if on Monday I sinned, and I happen to die, get hit by a car, I'm going to hell. And then on Tuesday, if I live pretty good and I get hit by a car, well, heaven's still an option for me. You know, and I kind of live like that. It was a very roller coaster. And I go to this youth camp, and the guy preached all weekend out of Romans about there's no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. And I was chatting to somebody in the car yesterday, and I was just talking about this, sort of really my testimony. And when that light goes on in your life, that you're absolutely saved by grace. And young people here this morning, the idea that, you know, you're sinning and you die that day and you're going to go to hell is a myth. Because Jesus conquered sin. We still have it. Right? We're going to still do stuff wrong till the day we die. But our assurance is that Jesus paid for it. The simple gospel is incredibly powerful if you get. It's why, as I'm the community guy, I've gone into community, and I've always thought this: if you really knew, probably the church and probably previous experience and probably misconceptions have clouded your view. But if you could really get what I discovered, that I can walk with my head held high, that though I have issues and problems and mistakes, I don't live in guilt or shame. The greatest thing in life is to know that you're not perfect, but to have someone like Jesus who paid for your past sin, your current sin, and your future sin. It's worth hearing every now and then. And I think at 16, I came away from that camp thinking, right, I put aside being nice. I've also done that well over the next few years as well. In other words, I didn't make that the focus. Nice might be a byproduct of something, particularly for men, because men feel like the goal of church is to make you nice. And there's clearly some of you are not nice. And the goal is to make you a follower of Jesus and that you fulfill your purpose that he's given you. And so every good preacher has a preamble, and that was it. But clearly somebody needed to hear that, so we just went there as we did. Hey, what a great church Bright Church is. Ben and Sarah do a great job, don't they? Leading you. You often forget because you're here every Sunday and you're involved in the life of the church, but it is a great church. I get to go to many churches, and this is a great church. I always feel really comfortable and at home, a part of this family. And, you know, being that I don't lead a church, maybe this could be mine. Who knows? I just went, so if you know my story, I handed my church over 2 years ago on a clear word from the Lord. It's time for you to take what you've done for one church, which was to help it become the kind of church our city can't live without. We're in Wollongong, the 10th largest city in Australia, and 73% of our population, when asked 10 years ago, what do you think of when you hear the word lighthouse? If you've been to Wollongong, we have 2 physical lighthouses down by the beach. The answer you should have answered on that survey was, When I hear the word lighthouse, I think of the 2 tall white buildings with the flashing lights. That should have been the answer. 73% of our community, when asked, what do you think of when you hear the word lighthouse, said lighthouse is a church that helps people. That's from non-Christians. And so we did build a church that our city can't live without, and that church exists. But I handed it over, not wanting to, by the way. It was the Lord's idea. Very rude of him. I didn't want to do it. I was going to stay comfortably till I retired. But he moved me on. But so for 2 years, we've been going to another church. I sat at the back with my arms folded, I can't believe he's, been wanting to do that for years. And, we did that. Sorry for those people folding their arms. Look at you all. All this other, like, I just naturally fold my arms. And so we were going to this other church. But actually, we went and submitted to our new leaders that we handed the church to and said, hey, how would you feel if we came back to Lighthouse? No role or anything. And because my kids and my grandkids go there, so truth be known, I'm just going to see my grandkids, really. But so I went back for the first time a month ago, and to which I haven't been back since because I'm preaching everywhere else. I'm like literally your worst parishioner. You don't want me in your church. I tell you, I'm here, I'm for you, but I'll never show up because I'm speaking in everybody else's churches along the way. Anyway, there it is. But it is nice, I must admit. And it's healthy, and it's grown. And you know what's most rude about it? They're happy. I mean, it's only been 2 years. In my mind, there should be weeping, sackcloth and ashes. But yet I walk in there and they're laughing and, who are you? Goodness gracious. There's no respect anymore. Isn't it true? I made the comment earlier, and I mean this, I've never been much for the, I don't know how to say it, titles, I suppose. We live in a very big title world. That's why it's interesting, people introducing me. Once you lose your titles, you don't know what to say. What is he? What is he without those titles, And I've got one left. I'm still the national leader for community engagement, so I'll voraciously fight that for the rest of my life. Even if I'm not good at it, I'm going to keep that role anyway. It's for the title. 1 Samuel 15:22. Come on, I've rambled for 7 minutes. That's enough. 1 Samuel 15:2. I want to read 2 scriptures. We're going to talk about obedience glorifies God, not sacrifice. 1 Samuel 15:2. I don't want to go deep into this story. Some of you would have known it, but this is about Saul, who wins a pretty decent battle that the Lord asked him to do. So he was being obedient at one level, but he came up with a brilliant idea after he finished the battle. God was really clear on when you defeat this enemy, you're to defeat it from human down to every animal. I mean, it's a pretty wild old story. But he came up with a brilliant idea. He thinks that he should keep all the animals because God would appreciate a nice little sacrifice. A bit of impressing of the Lord, a bit of using your own initiative. And Samuel, the prophet, comes to him and says to Saul, what is more pleasing, he's asking the question, to the Lord? Your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? He says, listen, obedience is better than sacrifice, and submission is better than an offering of the fat of rams, which I'm sure you've all done recently. And I want to read a second scripture because we're going to tie them together. Psalm 37:23 from an older gentleman. He's older at this point, David, as he's writing this. He's close to 90. And he says, the Lord directs the steps of the godly, and he delights in every detail of their lives. I like that bit, that a big God is interested in the small things. It's a key to leadership, another story. People, when they become big leaders, think they should be only on the big things. But what makes big leaders great is they notice small things. Free leadership lesson this morning from Paul. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. Once I was young and now I'm old, yet I have never seen the godly abandoned or their children begging for bread. Thank God that David was 90. Because if a 20-year-old tells you, I've seen a few things in my life to be true. If a 20-year-old tells you, hey, I can really help you here. I want to let you know that over my longevity of life, I can tell you something about God. You'd be like, yeah, mate, it's a theory for sure, that one. But I too, like I'm not 90, in case you haven't noticed, I too feel like as I look back over my life, have recognized, I want to talk to you about this because the temptation to sacrifice, assuming that's what God wants, and that's what would glorify him, I can tell you that it's actually obedience that God is looking for. I know you guys just did prayer and fasting, and I love the modern day prayer and fast. Yes, we fasted. I didn't look at Instagram for an hour. You know, good on you. Whew, you're toughing that one out, baby, let me tell you. Or whatever it is, but even in fasting, by all means, it should be done out of obedience because you're denying something not for sacrifice so that you might do good with the Lord. You do it out of obedience because God says in his word we should deny ourselves of something for the sake of coming closer to him. So there's always an edge in our human nature. You know, we often get taught if you give, you'll receive. Now, that's a true principle, no doubt. But you're not giving out of a little nudge of sacrifice or, you know, you're never tired, but this week you need a job promotion, so I'll slip a little bit extra in the... And, you know, God, see that sacrifice of mine there. No, he's looking for obedience and he's looking for it consistently over your life. I was chatting to somebody between the services this morning and it just dawned on me. See, I'm in a weird generation. We're highly loyal. Like, I've had the same health fund for 30-something years. Like, if you want to sell me something, you want guys like me. I've been in the same health fund. I've been in the same insurance company for 30-something years. My car, my house, everything. I never change. I know you're all shopping around. I just couldn't be bothered. I'm just like, there's the loyalty bonus. That seems about right. I'm loyal. And, you know, so I got the health fund. I've been flying Qantas for 30 years. I don't know why I'm doing that. They're late all the time. But I constantly loyal. I was in my same church for 44 years, people. That's a twitch you get when you stay in a church long term. And I look back over my life, but ironically, at the same moment I've got loyalty and faithfulness, I've got a zigzag going on of change. From role to role, from different to different. You know, I think right back down here, right to the early years, 30 years ago in Lighthouse, I was just a carpenter minding my own business, Messiah complex. Carpentry, ministry, death. No. And right back there, minding my own business, Lighthouse says, listen, because I've been volunteer youth pastor, we want to offer you a full-time job. Fantastic. They said, that's the good news. The bad news is we can't pay you. To which I said, I don't think that's a full-time job. That may be abuse or something. I don't know what that is, but it's not a full-time job. Anyway, I had this thought in this moment because I'd already heard the Lord tell me it was time for me to be a full-time youth pastor. I already heard that. So I have a decision to make. Who's in control of my destiny? Is it the church or is it Paul and the Lord? See, my life might look like it's got some successes in it, but actually all the success is the Lord's. The only part I can claim is obedience. So this is the Lord. I mean, I'm 20-something years of age, and he says to me, leave your well-paying job, become the full-time youth pastor, I'll look after the rest. So I'm walking down, so I do that. I'm now on 1 day a week's pay. I was getting paid as a project manager for a building company. That was a slightly different wage, just so you know. I'm walking, a guy in my church goes, Paul, you're a builder, I'm buying a house, would you come and have a look? Yeah, sure, see if it's okay. We're walking down the hall, he says to me, Paul, you should do this for a living, a business. I'm like, oh, yeah, I should. Light globe goes on. So I create a business for pre-purchase building inspections where I only have to work Monday where all the other pastors are taking it as a day off. Good on them. And half a day Saturday. So I'm working 1.5 days. I haven't interrupted my full-time job at Lighthouse. I'm working as the youth pastor and I'm making $2,000 for 30 years ago for 1.5 days work. In fact, I did it for 5 years. And I just realised that, and as I fast forward, you'll hear a bit about today, I hand over a church to any right-minded person would stay long-term in a full-time wage. But I was able to do what I did 2 years ago because I learned back here, if you obey the Lord, He's got it. So I can, now if you'd ask me here, I would say, don't believe me, I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you fast forward to 57-year-old Paul, and we look back over our life, I want to say to you that my life has zigzagged in amongst loyalty and faithfulness, but has done what it was meant to do because I just said, yes, Lord. I don't want to oversimplify it. I'm not that smart. But the opportunity came up and I learnt to hear the voice of the Lord and I learnt to say yes. The rest was His responsibility. Payment, provision. And I want to show you today through the scriptures how you can build the kind of life that glorifies the Lord because you know His voice and you know when to say yes. And that along the journey, you can trust that He does what He says. How many of you like to go camping? Any mad campers in the room? Yeah, just one of you, thank goodness. I was going to say, sir, you could join a Connect group, but clearly nobody in this room, you'd be all by yourself because nobody else likes camping. Or nobody wants to admit it. It's a bit embarrassing camping, isn't it? It's not. I'm just joking. My son just went camping this weekend and I thought I'd completely ruined it for them years ago, but I hadn't. Because my kids, they were pestering me when they were young. We want to go camping, we want to go camping. They'd only say that because they haven't gone camping. And I know this is not going to last. So I'm not spending thousands of dollars buying camping equipment like you can. So I go down to, I've just got the 2 boys. My daughter wasn't born then. And my wife, of course. That's the other loyal area, by the way. In case you were wondering. Haven't zigzagged through marriage, that's for sure. 38 years married I have been. Who knows, my wife's got the gift of long suffering right there, 38 years. And so we go, I think, well, I'm not going to buy a good tent because I really don't want them to enjoy it. And so I go to Kmart and I buy what they call a weekender. You know, there's something in that name too that already says this is not going to go well. And so we go down the coast, the south coast, and we put up on a Friday night, my wife and I and the 2 boys, we put up the weekender. And about somewhere in midnight, we heard the thunderstorm and the clouds and all that came over. And sure enough, 4 a.m., it just literally torrential rain. It's pouring down. Not only that, there's lightning. And I remember before we set up, I looked across and there's a true camper. He's got everything down to the stove, the fridge. He's got a screen, a TV screen. And I just want you to know, if you're taking your TV screen camping, you need to stay at home. You're not a camper. You are not a camper. He's just got that thing. It looks like the Taj Mahal. He's got it set up. And then we've got the weekender. And the storm comes across, and it's massive. The storm's blowing everywhere. And at 4 a.m., I can feel the water coming through the tent on my face. It's going to plan. And then before you know it, the tent poles, they don't just break at the joints, they shear off midway through the joints. And tent poles have gone everywhere through the tent screen. And we are laying there at 4:30 a.m., all 4 of us, with the weekender on our face. Camping's over. We will never do this again. It was a horrific moment for them all, but a plan for me. And so at 4:30 in the morning, we're in the dark, in the wet. We're packing up the tent and shoving it in the backyard. But we're ready to leave at about 6 a.m. The guy over here gets out of his tent, like he didn't even hear the storm. Like he didn't even know it existed. He gets out, has a bit of a stretch, looks at us like, what on earth happened over that side of the thing? And thank God for Kmart, they refund anything. And so I remember getting home and I just got that tent, like poles into the trolley, but couldn't put it in the bag. poles out everywhere. I wheel it up. That poor little teenage guy came up, prepubescent, with a high voice. And I rolled up and said, listen, mate, I just want to get a refund on the Weekender. And he's like, what's wrong with it? I said, well, have a read of the name there. I said, well, what does that say? He said, it says Weekender. I said, no, it's not. It's a one-night stand. And he gives me my money back and off I go. It's wonderful. And we never camped again. Since then, my sons do. And I realised something as I think back about that. We were in the same campground with the same storm, but I got a cheap tent. And you never make it in Christianity with a cheap tent. I want to talk to you how to build a frame. Because those that stay in God for their whole life, they don't stay because they're clever. We're not better than anybody else. But we've learned to build a frame. A frame that we still have the same problems, we still have the same issues, we still suffer the same loss, we're still in the same storms that everybody else has. Most people that watch other people not make it, they think, oh, those people that make it, they must be better people. Not really. We've just learned to build a frame inside of us. And I want to encourage you today, when you look at the Bible and you think about who are some people that you would glean from about building a good internal frame. I reckon Apostle Paul is one of them. Now, I want you to imagine him for a moment. If you could just, you can close your eyes if you want, but if you go back a couple of thousand years, and Apostle Paul, he's a tough cookie in terms of his resilience around faith. He was determined when he was killing Christians, thinking that was God's will. I talked to you about that last time in Rethink It. But he was also determined when he was born again. And I want you to imagine, here's Paul, he's 60 years of age, he's been doing this ministry for the Lord for many years now, and he's in prison for his faith. He's stooped over, he's 60, he's stooped over because he's done hundreds of kilometers of travel sharing the gospel. In fact, to this day, let me read to you some of the things that poor old Paul has gone through. To date, by the time he's 60, he's had 39 lashes 5 different times. You're going to feel like you had an incredible week after this. He was beaten with rods, and he was once left for dead. He was imprisoned, deserted by friends, co-workers, survived shipwrecks, storms, and starvation. Not only that, he carried the weight of the churches that they were planting. I often say this, and you wouldn't know this, Ben would never tell you. I can tell you because I'm out of the loop. I did lead a state, I get it a bit more. But I can tell you this, I was a project manager for a large building company doing multi-million-dollar buildings for 6 years, working 60, 70 hours a week, but senior pastor by far is the hardest job I've ever done. There's a weight that comes that you can't describe until you've done the gig. It's true. I just to this day, I can't, unless you've been a senior pastor. I'm not saying, that your job doesn't have weight, but I'm saying there's a certain sort of unsaid weight because it just looks like you're doing a good Sunday service with a couple of connect groups during the week. How hard could that be? But actually, I think the weight is this, and you don't know this, but I can speak on their behalf. Your senior pastors love you unusually and care for you. So that was my problem. I loved everybody in my church. I had an unusual love, concern, and care for the people in my church. And when they left, or when they got upset, or when they left so easily, and I always say this. Listen, people tell me, they'd come to me and say, "Listen, Paul, I just want you to know, it's the hardest thing for us to leave." I used to say, "No, leaving's easy. Staying's hard." Staying's hard. Staying is a hard thing because you've got to navigate your offence. You've got to navigate all I'm saying is, Paul, the Apostle Paul, he's planting churches. When you plant churches, you've got bickering Christians. Then he's got these pastors that are starting to announce who's better than who. You've got egos going on. I mean, that's back then. There's no egos in pastors today, but just back then it was there. And, no, I've never come across that in ACC. And so, Apostle Paul, with the weight of all that, he should have not just been stooped in physicality, he should have been stooped in spirit. his outside should have matched his inside. But his inside was opposite to his outside because he'd built a frame. And Paul says this thing. See, you'd think what I'm about to read to you, you think the Apostle Paul was laying on a Hawaiian beach drinking pina coladas because of what I'm about to read. Because he says in Philippians 4 and verse 4, as he's writing to the church, peering out the prison window, he says, rejoice in the Lord. Always. Rejoice in the Lord. I mean, is this a precursor to Tony Robbins coming to the earth? And Paul's started the latest thing. We can pay good money to go to a motivational conference, and they're going to tell you how to think your way out of your problems. This is not coming out of Paul's soul. It's coming out of his spirit. Because Paul, like David, is looking back over his life, and he could tell you, I listed, he doesn't need to list, I did it for him today, listed all that he could have focused on all the things. He's doing the Lord's work, for crying out loud, and he's getting beaten for it. That's unfair. Not a very just God. He had every reason, but not Paul, because he had built this ever-growing frame that said, I believe. I don't understand, but I believe in God. And I believe God knows what he's doing, even when I don't know what he's doing. Which is something you have to face if you want to be a long-term Christian. In fact, there's answers that I am dying to know. I've got 50, I don't know how many you got. I've got at least 50. The moment I go be with the Lord, I'm making a beeline towards him. I need some answers on these. I wouldn't have done it that way. That does not seem fair, you know. But I've learned I can build a framework of belief around God without understanding a lot of what God does. You don't build belief on knowing why and how God works. That's not how it happens. And I want you to know that this morning as we think about this, Paul was not coming from a positive thinking, though I believe thinking's important. Paul was coming from something, this ever-growing belief in God. And he was sort of almost saying, let the storms blow. Let the church people fight. I mean, let the preachers preach from ego. He said, it won't change my faith in the Lord. I'm not using it as an excuse to bow out halfway through. And I wondered today if we were to unzip the outer part of the tent of your life. And what sort of framework sits? Does it change with every storm that comes? Or are the storms producing a strength like they're meant to? Because you'll have them. They're coming. And instead of crushing you and waking up with the tent on your face and all you can see is the tent on your face of every problem that's come your way, you start building the kind of frame that says, no, God, I don't understand, but my belief in you didn't wane, it strengthened. This saying, I think, is true. It's what Paul knew, that belief always precedes behaviour. You know, Mobilise Australia, which I started, really only this year officially, I ran 4 pilot churches last year. Really, it's simply this. It's helping churches rethink how they think about the role of the church and the community. You know, I said it before, I'll say it again, and I know Ben and Sarah would agree with this, that, you know, sometimes we've accidentally, it's our fault, we apologise, we've accidentally led you to believe that your only role as a Western Christian is to somewhere in your life invite and bring one person to church. It's not biblical. It's not bad. You should invite people. But the Bible does not say go into the world and invite people to church. It says go into the world and make disciples. Mobilise Australia exists to train teams and their leaders to help you be mobilised every day of the week in everything you do to reach your friends and family for Christ. It's not Ben and Sarah's role to win your friends to Christ. It's your role. My poor church, they had to hear it from me for 22 years. Almost every Sunday I'd say, listen, I'm not leading your friends to Christ. Why would you bring them to a stranger? I was talking to a pastor friend of mine just 2 weeks ago, and it's cool. You're going to think this is weird, but, I'm a bit weird. I walk in, I'm having lunch at a cafe with him, but he's busy talking to the cafe owner. And he excitedly, the pastor, when he comes over to me, he says, Paul, I've just been having incredible faith conversations with this cafe owner. I said, that's fantastic, mate. He said, I thought I just invited him to church. I said, well, why on earth would you do that? You silly man. No, I'm not anti-bringing to church, but hear me out. I said, are you telling me that you're having great faith conversations one-on-one, and you believe the next step for that man's life is to come to church and hear you say the same thing from a platform? I said to him, I think you should keep doing what you're doing until he's ready for this, because this is different. But we haven't taught you, and we need to teach you, how to do the midweek share your faith in a way that follows the rhythm of your everyday life. Convictions are like poles. They're like anchors is another word you could use. And as you approach life's storms, I want you to know that you can count on God to bring you through. What do you think about the sovereignty of God? We're going to finish in a second. What do you think about the sovereignty of God? Well, let me describe it to you today. It's the term the Bible uses to describe God's perfect control and management of the universe, not just the earth, the universe. He preserves and governs it all. It's hard to imagine. He is continuously involved in all created things, directing them in a way that fulfills His divine purposes. Anxiety, my wife tells me regularly, she's a professional supervisor and mentor for pastors and leaders. Fantastic, got a counsellor on tap at home, which she loves, as you can imagine. But she always tells me when I start to go down the worry path about something, she says, Paul, you're describing something ahead of time that hasn't even happened. And she always reminds me that anxiety is so often perceived chaos, not actual chaos. I mean, we've got faith for something that's chaotic, but not faith that God could be in it. We're believing ahead for things that's never happened and probably won't, but we'll spend hours worrying about it and anxious about it. And so the solution could be then, see, we're worried about losing control. It scares the daylights out of us. What if we get to a situation and we can't control it? Well, I've got a couple of things to help you. Next time you're on a plane, take a parachute. Hey? Minimise your risk. All right? Try getting out those doors, though, at 30,000 feet. That'll be Next time you go to a restaurant, take your own cutlery. Or avoid falling in love with any person so your heart doesn't get broken again. Do that. Live isolated. Stay away from people. That's the way to do it. Well, that's ludicrous. Here's what you do. Here's the biblical response to a sovereign God in a life that feels out of control. Relinquish it. Stop trying to control it. You can't. In fact, it's a sign, it's a bit crazy really, because the idea that we could control a sovereign God who can do anything, wouldn't it be better to put your trust in a God that whatever you're going through today, He can turn it around. He can change it because that's what He does. He owns it. He knows how to do it. Relinquish control. See, I think the greatest framework of Paul, where he constantly believed despite the storms, allowed him to say to himself and to the others, rejoice in the Lord. You can do it. Today you can rejoice in the Lord, not because your circumstances are great, but because of who you follow. And I don't know whether it means much to you today, but I feel like it's one of the messages, I've got a few, It's one of the messages I'm meant to come and tell people because I'm a bit older. Because I can look back. And I can tell you that I've had to make some scary, I could be living on the street type of decisions. And every time, God just makes sure that I've got provision. He makes sure that I don't go hungry. And he makes sure that, there's been times where I thought my marriage was going to be over, and there's times, and if I just let God get involved, he does amazing things. Philippians 1:12. And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything has happened to me has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I'm in chains. He must have been whinging about it. Knows that I'm in chains because of Christ. Here's an important thing. Because I could talk about this today and it could feel a lot about you. And it does a lot feel about us because, we're aware of ourselves. But I would just add one more thing that was part of the framework of Paul. He realized that all the trouble and all the prisons and all the beatings were so that others might know Jesus Christ as well. And that your pain has a story, and it's probably a story that others might need to hear. A story that got you through, not because you were great at something, but because you trusted in somebody great. We in the Western Church can believe, because of the songs we sing, the messages we hear, we can hear this one message, which is really only half the story. We hear this, that Jesus came to rescue us. That's true, but it's really only half the story. Because the other half of the story is Jesus came to recruit you. And if you live like Jesus, we use this, I've heard it, I've probably preached it, so I want to own the saying. We've probably said things like, if you were the only person on the earth, Jesus died for you. It's not biblical, but it's possibly true. It's possibly true, because he does love you that much. But what it does is it makes you the center of the relationship. And while he loves you so much, he died for you so that you might take all of the frame that's been built in you and you would use it for the purpose of the gospel. And the people you live next door that don't yet know Jesus, the family members that don't yet, you would use that. You don't know how to share Jesus? Yes, you do. Tell your story. I was the chaplain for the basketball, right? You know that, for many years. And I just realised there's no switch to my Christianity. They wanted me to turn my Christianity off when I went to basketball because, I'm a chaplain, don't share your faith here. And I just thought, well, that's weird. That would be me not being me. So I just was very natural. Sometimes I turn up Monday morning to training. I say, hey, boys, I've got to tell you something. Yesterday, we prayed for somebody in church who had this, and they got totally healed. Now, that's not me ponying around the room. That's me saying, oh, this is what my life is. This is what happens in my world. Communicate your God story in a human form. That's what you need to do. Why don't you stand this morning? Hey, tonight I want to speak to you, if you're absolutely wild, and come back for a second service tonight. Just about you being, I've talked to the leadership team about this before, but about you seeing yourself not as somebody who goes to a job, but somebody who's a well. Wells are places people come to because they need something natural. This is a well, but not everybody's coming to this one. But if you saw yourself as a well, people coming to you that are not ready to come here, I wonder what the difference that would make in the life of the church and the kingdom as we go. I'm going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to pray for you as we finish. I feel embarrassed bringing our books because you guys bought them all last time. Goodness me. But, there might be a couple of new people. Rethink, it's the latest one. Thank God it's Monday. Story of my church and how we turned it around towards community. That was a big promotion on that one just there. I'm going to pray. Close your eyes if you could. I reckon there'd be people here that feel a bit anxious. If you feel anxious from time to time and a bit overwhelmed, I got to tell you, it's pretty human. It's not unusual. You're pretty normal. It's not a sin. You're just expressing a fallen part of our life, whereas we panic when we lose a bit of control. I reckon there'd be a few people here like that. And if that's you this morning, I'm not going to invite anybody forward, but we talked about obedience, it glorifies the Lord. If you just sense some of what we said today is kind of relating to your situation, why don't you just raise your hand where you are? I want to pray for you. I want you to have obedience to the Lord in faith, because we're going to believe for something miraculous to happen. We're going to believe that this week, in that moment you go to default into anxiety, in that moment you will say out loud, I trust you, Lord. You'll say it out loud. You'll shock yourself. I trust you, Lord. And you're like, it's the first time I've said that in this situation. Father, I pray over every hand that's raised and those that know they've been self-reliant, in a panic about their situation or circumstance. I pray that something would leap from the framework of their life this week that declares, in this situation, Lord, I trust you for finance, for relational healing. I trust you for that new job. I trust you for that move sideways that I'm worried about. I trust you for that future husband, that future wife. Lord, we ask your favor and blessing on it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, well, thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video today. Like, subscribe, and share if you think this content will be helpful for you or others. If you did give your life to Jesus today, please let us know. We would love to walk that journey with you. You can check us out at brightchurch.com, and we look forward to seeing you either in person at a service or online. We hope to see you soon.